Their urgency had melted away. They leaned back against the trees and breathed in the world around them. Tamar's disdain had evaporated. He seemed almost grateful, but there was still something in his eyes that Gale didn't trust. They were each cradling a bottle of their family brew. Gale's mead contained 2 types of honey and a pinch of juniper to give its mild sweetness a hint of gin flavoring. Adrian preferred to call his mead classic. Others referred to it as simple. Gale looked up at Tamar with a smile.
This one time, Conager and I were out by the Dular's farm. You know, in back, that patch of rocky land where people go to shoot.
Tamar nodded.
We were only about 12 or 13. We didn't even have longbows yet. We were practicing with a couple of short bows, trying to hit a melon from about 200 paces. We kept missing. Each of us had taken 4 shots when Bodwin comes strolling by. He watches us both miss, then hops down from his crayer. This was before we knew him, so you can imagine, we were in awe. With a smile and a laugh, he takes the short bow out of my hands and starts tutoring us in this serious, insightful voice.
You're making the bow shoot the arrow. You're just providing it with force. That's not right. It should be the opposite. All the bow needs to do is to grant you its force. The arrow's path is a projection of your intent. The movement of your body guides it. Watch closely, boys. This is how a master does it.
Gale laughed and then seized control of himself to finish the story.
Without thinking, trying to shock us with his speed, he drew a longbow arrow from the quiver on his back, loaded it into the short bow, and let it loose. It was so far off that it completely missed the hill the melon was on.
Tamar snickered.
The arrow hit one of Miss Dooler's chickens. The whole flock went into a frenzy. You should have seen the look on Bodwin's face. Then we heard the door on the other side of the Doolar's manor creak open. Bodwin ran over to the dead chicken, snatched it up, and kicked dirt around to hide the blood. Of course, there was no place to hide around there. So he grabbed us by our collars and dragged us into the chicken coop, just as Miss Doolar came around the corner to see what all the commotion was about. She circled the yard 3 times. I tried to ask Bodwin something, and he said, "Silence, she'll hear you. And don't speak of this to anyone. If the women hear of this, my wife's jaw won't still for days."
It took Tamar a moment to stop laughing.
A couple days later, I told my dad what happened. He laughed so hard he fell out of his chair.
Tamar took a long swig from his bottle and leaned forward, obviously feeling the alcohol.
We'll never find Shinor out here. It's just too vast a wilderness, and there are too many places for him to hide.
Finding him will be easier than you think.
Gale smiled.
How so?
I brought a friend along to help.
Gale pulled a wooden whistle out of his pocket.
Sabotage bird.
Gale nodded.
This whole time, Nako has been combing the area. I brought a bunch of the nectar he eats just in case he can't find enough food out here. He's a hungry little bird. Eats more of this stuff than you could imagine.
Where has he been all this time?
Like I said, he's been out searching. He'll show up once he gets hungry or finds Shinor.
Are we cheating on our test to become wardens?
Of course not. This is perfectly legal. Sabotai recommended it. Even with Nako's help, this will still be the most difficult quest ever given to a couple of apprentices.
Gale opened his eyes just a crack. The sun was peeking out over an orange horizon. The air was still moist, forming a cold condensation on his hands and face. For the first time in weeks, he had gotten a full night's rest. Tamar stood nearby with a grim expression on his face. He was holding his bow, drawing back an arrow. He aimed at Gale. Gale hadn't moved yet. Tamar thought Gale was asleep. This couldn't be some kind of joke. Tamar was betraying him again. Lying flat on his back, Gale couldn't hope to dodge. Tamar couldn't miss at this range. Gale's only choice was to reason with him.
After I risked my life to save yours, you would turn on me without a second thought?
Tamar didn't respond. Gale opened his mouth to continue reasoning, but Tamar wouldn't hear it. He unleashed his arrow. Gale flinched, but didn't feel any pain. Tamar couldn't have missed. Taking deep breaths, Gale looked over at the arrow. It was embedded in a root. 8 hairy legs were coiled around the shaft. It was a giant spider impaled. It was a lurker. They come out at night to sneak up on their sleeping prey. 2 slender fangs arched down from its head. Its poison was fast-acting because the long fangs could inject the venom straight into a vein. Gale cringed and drew away from the spider. It took him a few seconds to catch his breath. Tamar chuckled.
We're even now.
Leaning back against a cluster of roots, Gale noticed that Tamar had gathered a bag of giant raspberries. He held the bag out to Gale.
You want some?
Gale leaned forward, took a few out of the bag, and popped one in his mouth. He puckered at the sour juices flowing down onto his palate. After a few more, Gale looked over at a red mushroom beside him.
They got even bigger overnight.
Tamar nodded. A huge patch of red mushrooms rose out of the thick roots that were tangled together across the otherwise barren ground. Trees rose up here and there, but their small canopies weren't equal to their massive root systems.
Just think, Gale. If we could get half of this patch back to Vindarim and dry it out before it molded.
We would be rich. My father's best friend, Sabit, found one about the size of the one beside you. A merchant passing through Vindari gave him a whole gold bit for it.
That is more than I make in 6 months watching the boundary.
Yet we can't get a single piece of this back to Vindari before it rots. We can't dry it out. That would take days, and the smoke would draw predators.
And we can't come back for it. A patch like this comes and goes in less than a week. What a waste.
Gale smiled.
It's not funny.
Gale pulled a map out of his backpack and placed it between them.
I've been thinking, it will be a few days before Shinor catches up to us. We could hang around here waiting for him. Or we could travel to this valley for a few days.
Gale pointed to an unmarked section of the map.
What's there?
I don't know. No one knows. No one has ever been there.
It's never been explored?
Gale shook his head.
It's too far out of the way. No one ever comes this far north. Besides Sabbatai, he's always too busy to explore the dozens of valleys scattered across this land. Just think what we might find there. What if we find a huge patch of Sindo? It would definitely survive the journey back to Vindari. Think of how much we could sell it for, or better yet, we might run into a creature that no one has ever seen before. Wouldn't that be something?
Sounds like a lot of work with no guaranteed reward. Besides, there might be a reason that no one has ever been there. What if there's a Rukal nest?
Rukals were the nastiest type of fist bee, known for chasing down and stinging to death every creature they encountered.
What if people have tried to explore it before but died trying? Wardens disappear in this part of the jungle all the time.
No one has ever been there. How can you resist? And don't tell me you're afraid. I know you better than that.
All right. It's not like we have anything else to do.
Gale grinned and threw on his backpack. Tamar snatched up his pack as well. They headed north towards the great unknown.